Welcome everybody. As you might notice, I've shaved my beard. So today we're going to read some Kant. This is the book. Hope you can all see it. It is Immanuel Kant's Prolegoma to Any Future Metaphysics in Focus, edited by Beryl Logan. So let's go to the introduction to just ease ourselves into this. Just zoom in a little bit more. In the preface to the Prolegoma, Kant states that the suggestion of David Hume was the very thing which many years ago first interrupted my dogmatic slumber and gave my investigations in the field of speculative philosophy quite a new direction. In the Critique of Pure Reason, Kant refers to the uncritical dogmatists as one who has not surveyed the sphere of his understanding, and therefore has not determined, in accordance with principles, the limits of his possible knowledge. The conclusion that Hume drew in his attack on a single but important concepts in metaphysics vis-a-vis that of cause and effect prompted Kant to undertake his survey in the Prolegoma concerning any future metaphysics, in order to determine the possibility and limits of metaphysical knowledge. As a result of the importance that Kant places on Hume's arguments, I intend to adopt as my peculiar viewpoint in this introduction what Kant perceives as problems in Hume's philosophy and his answers to those problems. Generally, this consists in responding to Humean skepticism by offering conditions under which objective validity is possible. So that's a very important aspect. And also, what was a quote here, this is also a very important quote. Where appropriate, I will make reference to Hume's doctrines in order for the reader to be more familiar with some of the arguments to which Kant was responding in the Prolegoma. This will allow the reader not only to grasp the force and the intent of Kant's own positions, but also to recognize the pivotal role played by one of Kant's precursors in the development of his critical philosophy. This focus is also reflected in the scholarly literature, as is evident in the bibliography included in this volume. The first issue dealt with is the nature of the causal connection, a dominant concern in the Prolegoma. Kant is seeking a way to provide objective validity for causal judgments, as Hume's position allows only subjective validity and results in skepticism. So Kant is trying to provide objective validity. We then turn to Kant's arguments with respect to Hume's position on mathematics, which are closely allied to causality, because Hume considered all our judgments to be either matters of fact, synthetic propositions known a posteriori, or relations of ideas, analytic propositions known a priori. The causal relation was regarded by Hume to be the former and mathematics to be the latter. Kant claims that if Hume had only seen that mathematics consists of synthetic propositions known a priori, he would have realized that causality, as well as metaphysics, consists of the same, and been saved from his skepticism. Finally, I addressed the discussion of the limits and boundaries of reason, which refer to arguments in Hume's dialogues concerning natural religion. Kant's intention to save religious belief from the skepticism that he perceived in Hume's position. This section of the Prolegoma has received little attention in Kant's literature, but will be dealt with in some detail here. Okay, so what do we have? Hume considered all our judgments to be either matters of fact or relations of ideas. The causal relation was regarded by Hume to be the former and the mathematics to be the latter. Kant claims that if Hume had only seen that mathematics consists of synthetic propositions known a priori, he would have realized that causality as well as metaphysics consists of the same, and been saved from his skepticism. So that's another Very important statement, and it's great to have clarity at the very beginning when you're reading the Prolegoma. Understand what at least the experts believe to be the cause, the main gist of what has been argued here. What is Hume's problem? The first three reprinted papers in this volume focus on what Kant thought was Hume's problem and how he sought to solve it. In the preface to the Prolegoma, Kant states that Hume's problem lay in accounting for the origin of the causal concept. Hume is led to his position on causality by the restrictions of his empiricism and its theoretical constructs. As there is no impression of the concept of cause, there can be no idea of it. Hume questioned the stance of his predecessors that the concept of cause could be thought by reason a priori, independent of all experience. Kant was awoken from his dogmatic slumber by Hume's suggestion that the necessity of the causal principle arises solely from observation and experience, and his conclusion that the causal relation and its justification is a matter of fact. Kant goes beyond the empiricist picture of mental life as consisting only of impressions, ideas, and the associations between them to concern himself with, quote, what types of faculties are necessary for cognition and how their existence might be established. From a Kantian perspective, Hume had several problems. So let's just go up to that again. So what we have here is, in the preface to the Phenomenology, or the Prolegoma, Kant states that Hume's problem lay in accounting for the origin of the causal concept. So I'll just highlight this here. Let me just get my mouse 1 second. Because I know that when I'm clicking, sometimes it can be actually a bit annoying. So if I just get my mouse, which I'll get 1 second here. The most important thing that we need to keep in mind when we're reading Kant and Hume is what is the development of the concept of cause? Because Hume is critiquing the rationalists, but also the empiricists, but particularly Descartes and also Locke, and saying, look, you guys have assumed that we have this impression of cause, but wherever I look for this impression, I don't see it. I don't see it in the deity. I don't see it in the matter. So I'm just a bit confused as to how you actually have this idea of causality. Okay, so I have my mouse. I'm just going to plug it in now. That's what you get for getting a cheap mouse. The mouse is deciding not to work, so we have another one here. Sorry, I should get this in before I come on live. Okay, here we go. So, where are we now? Okay. The first three reprinted papers in this volume focus on what Kant thought was Hume's problem and how he sought to solve it. In the preface to the Prolegoma, Kant states that Hume's problem lay in accounting for the origin of the causal concept. Hume is led to this position on causality by the restrictions of his empiricism and its theoretical constructs. As there is no impression of the concept of cause, there can be no idea of it. And this is very important. Hume is led to his position on causality by the restrictions of his empiricism and its theoretical constructs. As there is no impression of the concept of cause, there can be no idea of it. And one book that I would say, which is phenomenal, I think we've read parts of it, but we'll read it again, is Paul Russell's Riddle on Hume. Just a phenomenal book, or The Riddle of the Treatise by Paul Russell. Hume questioned the stance of his predecessors that the concept of cause could be thought by reason a priori, independent of all experience. Kant was awoken from his dogmatic slumber by Hume's suggestion that the necessity of the causal principle arises solely from observation and experience, and his conclusion that the causal relation and its justification is a matter of fact. Kant goes beyond the empiricist picture of mental life as consisting only of impressions, ideas, and the associations between them to concern himself with what, quote, types of faculties are necessary for cognition and how their existence might be established. From a Kantian perspective, Hume had several problems which stem from his empiricism. His doctrine committed him to the view that the only objects of knowledge are the contents of consciousness. Impressions of ideas, and the only judgments are those expressing matters of fact or relations of ideas. This led him, according to Kant, to regard any a priori principle, such as a causal connection, to be fictitious and custom-bred, or also known as constant conjunction, resulting in skepticism, as there can be no empirical ground for the validity of causal inferences, as any empirical claim presupposes the principle in question, and the principle is not self-evident, as the concept of event and cause are separate ideas. The principle is natural and non-rational in character. The resulting lack of rigorous grounding led Kant to seek some criterion, which is not subject to the defects of the rationalist and empirical methods of proof, and which is adequate to determine the validity or invalidity of general principles. Kant saw that a new conceptual context was necessary in order to justify philosophically the causal inference. This context consists of the categories of which causality is one. Those principles known a priori yet synthetic that determine or condition sense impressions, providing a justification or objective validity that combats the perceived skepticism inherent in the traditional empirical position. However, these concepts are also synthetic in nature, while they are logically independent of experience and are applied to experience. They are not tautological, nor are they logically necessary. This realization represented an enlargement of the empiricist epistemological context. It went beyond the traditional division of the types of human knowledge which Hume endorsed into relations of ideas and analytics a priori and matters of fact, synthetic a posteriori, to include a third type of proposition, synthetic yet known a priori. In order to avert the Humean skepticism that results from the traditional division of proposition, such propositions must be possible. In order for objectively valid causal inferences and metaphysics to be possible, such propositions must be possible. To solve Hume's problem, Kant had to first ask and then answer the question, how are synthetic judgments possible a priori? Given that we do make some judgments, where the terms in the judgment are synthetically connected, but whose validity seems to be established a priori, Kant must ask how such judgments are possible. The first 5 sections of the Prolegoma set the stage. What is the source of metaphysical knowledge? Metaphysics is not empirical, but is knowledge of it a priori. The very concept of metaphysical knowledge, Kant claims, implies that such is its nature. It is knowledge that lies beyond experience. What kind of knowledge can be called metaphysical? Here Kant draws the distinction between analytic a priori propositions and synthetic a posteriori propositions. The former are logical in nature and as their terms are connected through identity, all bodies are extended. They are dependent upon the principle of non-contradiction. Our knowledge is not expanded by knowing the truth of this proposition. On the other hand, we can only connect the terms in the proposition and determine the truth of, quote, some bodies have weight by appeal to experience. My knowledge of the concept of body will be expanded by knowing the truth of this proposition. But it is Kant's insight to recognize that certain sciences consist of synthetic, not logically connected judgments, which have a priori certainty, and whose origin lies in pure understanding and reason. Judgments of experience and judgments of mathematics, while synthetic, are also a priori. Hume's mistake with respect to mathematics was to regard mathematical knowledge to be analytic, given the traditional empiricist division. Propositions known a priori could only be analytic in nature. Quote, metaphysics is properly concerned with synthetical propositions, a priori, and these alone constitute its end. The generation of a priori cognition by concrete images, as well as by concepts in fine of synthetical propositions, a priori and philosophical cognition, constitutes the essential subject of metaphysics. Note to the analytic synthetic division. The dogmatic philosopher sought the sources of metaphysical judgments in metaphysics itself and not apart from it in the pure laws of reason generally. Rather than examining the workings of reason to know first what kinds of propositions are possible and then to seek where they may be applied, dogmatic philosophers look to the subject contents first, presupposing the analytic a priori synthetic and a posteriori distinction. Is metaphysics possible at all? We do not have to ask whether synthetic a priori knowledge is possible, as mathematics and natural science both contain propositions which are thoroughly recognized as apodictically certain, partly by mere reason, partly by general consent arising from experience, and yet as independent of experience. In order for metaphysics, knowledge of highest being and of future existence, to be possible as a science, it has to be shown that it too consists of such propositions. The question to be asked then is, quote, how is knowledge of pure reason possible? We begin with what we know, that mathematics and natural science consist of synthetic a priori propositions, show how these are possible within these sciences, and then apply our findings to metaphysics. The main transcendental question that needs to be answered are, 1. How is pure mathematics, pure natural science possible? How is metaphysics possible in general? How is metaphysics possible as a science? These questions form the body of Kant's inquiry in the Prolegoma. In 21, we find Kant's logical table of judgments. This table consists of the exhaustive yet possible judgments divided into 4 types, as to quantity, as to quality, as to relation, and as to modality. These judgments correspond to the transcendental table of the concepts of the understanding, which is also given in the CPR. Briefly, those concepts or judgments as to quantity are concerned with how much the subject term, S, the predicate term, P, refers to or pertains to all S's are P, some S are P, no S are P. Judgments as to quality are concerned with the reality of the terms in the judgment. Those as to modality refer to modes of existence. S may be P, not to be P, may not be P, S is P, S must be P. Finally, those of relation include claims as to inherence and subsistence, accident and substance, community, interdependence, and causality. The complete solution to the Humean problem occurs after Kant has shown that the judgments of causality as a species of synthetic a priori judgments are possible, when the objects of experience are subsumed under those pure concepts of the understanding. The solution occurs after Kant has shown adequately that these concepts and the principles drawn from them stand a priori before all experience and have their undoubted objective rightness, though admittedly only in respect of experience. Knowledge has been enlarged with apodictic certainty. Hume and Kant on causality. As it was Hume's conclusion with respect to the subjective validity carried by causal inferences that roused Kant from his uncritical position and led him to examine the faculties of reason that make such arguments possible, a brief outline of Hume's position on causality is appropriate. An understanding of Hume's own position will allow the reader to see what Kant thought was lacking in this system, objective validity, and how he sought to remedy this lack. Hume on causality is custom bred. Hume argues that causality is the connection that the imagination is determined to make on the basis of repeated experience, rather than it being on connection between objects. He was satisfied that the only grounding possible for causal judgments was to be found on the natural propensity of the imagination to connect related objects. This psychological grounding and validity was sufficient to justify our causal claims, and, in fact, is all that is available to us in our empiricism. The process, according to Hume, is as follows. I am presented with A and with B, and A occurs in time before B, and they occur in close physical proximity. After repeatedly being presented with similar conjunctions of A and B, my imagination eventually comes to expect B whenever A is close at hand. So, on subsequent occasions, the appearance of A leads me to expect B, and I will likely be distressed if B does not appear and seek to determine why B did not appear, depending on the intensity and frequency of the conjunction. And the appearance of B leads me to attribute A as the cause of its experience. The ground and validity of causal judgments is found in the natural and psychological necessity in the imagination to connect these related perceptions. A person who is suddenly brought into this world would observe a continual succession of objects, but could not reach the idea of cause and effect, because the powers by which all natural operations are performed never appear to the senses. By gradual experience, this person will come to infer the existence of the A as a cause whenever B the effect appears. This does not occur because this person has now acquired some insight into any powers, but because the person is determined through the force of the associative principles of the imagination and repeated experience custom to draw the causal conclusion. Hume's response to his predecessors consists of an attack on their claims of causal connection occurring in the objects themselves, rather than in the observers of the objects. The causal connection is the result of the observer's imagination drawing association between observed relata. Thus, Hume, before Kant, made the first move in the Copernican revolution. He moved the observer to the center of her experiential universe by making the observer the seat or source of the causal nexus. Given experience of a particular sort, that is the observer experiencing items in temporal and spatial proximity. And given the associative operations of the imagination, the observer will make causal associations and judgments. Causality, then, is a principle drawn from custom and habit, and the great guide of life. Its necessity and validity are psychological, grounded in the associative faculty of the imagination. Kant and causality as a synthetic a priori concept. The Humean observer is thus at the whim of her experience and her associative imagination. Her judgments based on her perceptions have subjective validity, as they refer to her experience as the thinking subject. The Kantian Copernican revolution, on the other hand, not only moves the observer to the center, but makes the observer, the rational being, an active participant in the process, as she synthesizes her sense perceptions by means of her pure concepts of the understanding. Objective validity is conferred upon the judgments as they agree with the object, and are not just expressions of her experience. Kant sees Hume's problem with respect to causality to be the result of his regarding not the whole of his problem, but a part which, by itself, can give us no information. By only accounting for the perceptual or experiential side of causal connection, Hume leaves us with a dose of skepticism with respect to the validity of causal judgments, as their connection is synthetic and their only necessity is psychological. Kant's answer to Hume is that objective validity can only be given to an observed conjunction if the conjunction is conditioned or determined by a causal principle that is synthetic but is also a priori. Kant gives the following example in footnote on page 68. When the sun shines on the stone, it grows warm. This judgment, however often I and others may have perceived it, is a mere judgment of perception and contains no necessity. Perceptions are only usually conjoined in this manner. Hume stops here. But if I say the sun warms a stone, I add to the perception a concept of the understanding vis-a-vis that of cause which necessarily connects with the concept of sunshine, that of heat, and the synthetic judgment becomes of necessity universally valid, vis-a-vis objective, and is converted from a perception into experience. According to Hume's analysis of causality, as I repeatedly encounter the sun shining and the stone gradually becoming warm, the association is gradually set up in my imagination between these two perceptions, such that I will come to regard the sun as being the cause of the stone warming. It results from my experience and my imagination, and the more repetitious and intense my experience and more immediate and forceful will be the association I establish between these two perceptions. This association is the core of Hume's analysis of causality, and it is all the imagination needs, or has available, to make a judgment of causality. On the basis of my experience, I claim that the sun is the cause of the stone becoming warmer. But for Kant, succession is not sufficient. First, observing the sun shining and then feeling the warmth in the stone, or seeing a ship upstream and then downstream, will not prompt us to regard the sun as being the cause of the stone being warm any more than it will prompt us to regard the ship upstream to be the cause of the ship downstream. The whole problem of causality is not just accounting for or providing the psychological mechanism by which we make causal judgments, but it is providing the objective validity for these judgments. Hume mistook subjective necessity, the force of association based on custom or habit, for objective necessity. Without this objective component, quote, Hume ran his ship ashore for safety's sake, landing on skepticism, there to let it lie and rot. Kant's intent to give the ship a pilot who, by means of safe astronomical principles drawn from knowledge of the globe and provided with a complete chart and compass, may steer the ship safely, whether he listened. The concept of causality is not derived from experience, rather it is applied to experience. Only in its application would we ever think of calling the relationship between two perceptions a causal one. Simply observing succession and proximity in space, no matter how many times it occurred, would never lead us to see something called causality. Without A occurring, B would not occur. So we could argue for Kant, why does the person judge that one object has produced the other, i.e., has been the cause of the other, from his inference of the existence of one from the appearance of the other? First, perceptions are compared and conjoined in a consciousness of my state, subjective validity, but then a judgment with respect to consciousness in general, objective validity must follow. Without viewing the succession and making the inference through or by means of the category of something called causal relation, the production of B by A would never be inferred from either the appearance of A followed by B, or from the inference of the existence of A from the appearance of B. In other words, There may be a psychological necessity in the process in the mind, but there is no objective validity in the judgment made. What is required There is no objective validity in the judgment made. What is required, Kant argues, beyond coming to expect the stone to become warm whenever the sun shines, is the addition of a concept, that of causality, which confers objective validity on the judgment by referring it beyond our individual sensation to an object, and converts the judgment of perception observed conjunction to a judgment of experience conditioned by the principle of causality. While perceptions of a peculiar sort, or perceptions given to us in a peculiar way, are not only necessary but limit the way or prescribe the conditions under which the category is applied. For example, A and B must be observed successively. It is only by the use of the category of cause and the effect that the general or logical form of the judgment, all events have causes, can be applied to the perceptions. In 20, Kant calls the distinction between judgments of perception and judgments of experience. In this distinction, which Geyer calls notorious, has been a topic of some discussion in the literature, and included in this volume is a paper by T.E. Uhling. This paper focuses on sections 18, 19 and 20 of the Prolegoma, which contain Kant's arguments relating to the categories, the a priori concepts, under which every perception must be first of all subsumed and then by their means changed into experience. Uhling points to a major but interesting conflict between the Prolegoma and the CPR. In the latter text, Kant seems to indicate that all judgments of perception do become judgments of experience when the categories are superadded. However, in the former text, Uhling says he explicitly argues that there are some judgments of perception that cannot become judgments of experience, such as aesthetic judgments, which refer merely to feeling and not to any object. Those judgments of perception which can stand under conditions, be synthesized according to the categories, can become judgments of experience. Jung uses the judgments of perception, experience to clarify what Kant means by universal and objective validity. This is an important clarification because there are the features that mark judgments of experience. He argues that what Kant means by these terms is a point of interpretation. The nature of a judgment of perception is that it expresses how things are for me at this time. Its subjective validity derives from its reference to my sensations and the subjective necessity of their connection. Quote, I do nothing but refer to my sensations to one another. A judgment of experience, on the other hand, carries universal validity by adding a third aspect to the connection. In making such judgments, we claim that a certain connection obtains generally, and that everyone under similar circumstances should make this connection. Quote, the given intuition must be subsumed under a concept which determines the form of judging in general relatively to the intuition, connects its empirical consciousness in consciousness generally, and thereby procures universal validity for empirical judgments. In other words, what is given to me as a sense of perception and which I connect in my consciousness in a judgment of perception, quote, I dropped the glass and it broke, the connection of two perceptions is then conditioned by the understanding applying an a priori concept, for example, causality. Once connected with this concept, objective validity is conferred upon the judgment, so that anyone else experiencing a similar connection of perceptions will make the same judgment. Dropping a glass is the cause of it breaking, the two perceptions with the addition of the concept. In making such judgments, we assert that a certain connection obtains universally, and hence that everyone should find this connection obtaining under similar circumstances. In spite of the scholarly disputes raging around this distinction, some of which Uhling refers to, it is a useful one for our purposes. It helps to indicate the sense in which Kant thought Hume did not fully represent the whole problem of causality. By allowing only judgments of perception, the observer's connection of her own experience and finding necessity in the associative processes of the imagination, Hume took only the first step in accounting for causal judgments. For Hume, repeated observed succession is necessary and sufficient for the imagination to make a judgment of causality. With judgments of experience carrying the objective validity permitted by the addition of the third aspect, the a priori concept of causality, Kant took the final step. For Kant, observed succession is necessary, but it is not sufficient. In Kant's system, causality is a synthetic proposition known a priori. It expands our knowledge in that we are making connections in experience, but it is also a priori in that it is applied to experience. The synthetic a priori nature of the causal claim can be shown by the following distinction. The analytic a priori judgment in respect of causality would be, quote, all effects are caused. If one analyzes the term effects and causes, one finds that what an effect is something that is caused, the truth of the claim can be known before experience. The term effect is found in or is contained in the term cause, so that it is not possible to conceive of an uncaused effect. However, the judgment, all events are caused, is a synthetic proposition known a priori. It is possible to imagine an uncaused event as an event is an occurrence with no imputation of causality in it. But unless the causal connection is known a priori and applied to succession, no judgment of causality is possible. Only when the given intuition is subsumed under a concept which determines the form of judging in general with respect to the particular intuition will such judgments have an objective validity or justification. According to Kant, and I just want to check here, so this is where we are on page 18, and this goes up to 34. Yeah, that's a pretty big introduction, isn't it? Well, there's notes, so it goes up to 30, and we're on page 18. So I might not be able to read all of this today, but we're going to make a stab at it anyway. According to Kant, Hume did not distinguish between two kinds of synthetic judgments. Those by which we pass beyond our concept of the cause, by experience, synthetic a priori, a posteriori, and those thereby we pass a priori beyond our concept, and so to extend our knowledge. Hume regarded the self-increment of concepts to be impossible, concluding that causality arose from custom-bred habit, that carried a universality and necessity that were only suspicions. Hume's error was in inferring from the contingency of our determination in accordance with the law to the contingency of law itself, and in not carefully examining all the possible synthetic a priori propositions available to the understanding. If he had done so, he would have found that both causality and mathematics consisted of such propositions. Kant thought that the causal judgments that we do in fact make could have objective validity only if the judgment of perception, the judgment of expectation and custom, quote, when the sun shines on the stone it grows warm, is converted into the judgment of experience by subsuming the given perception under an a priori concept by adding the concept of causality. Reason judges that the observed succession, e.g. the sun shining and the stone becoming warmer, is an instance of causality. The resulting judgment has become validity. Hume's problem lay in not seeing the whole problem of causality. Kant's answer is the judgments of perception, while providing the content, lack the objective validity of a judgment of experience. The sun warms the stone, that is gained in applying an a priori concept to the observation. Okay, so next time I will read the Kant and Hume on mathematics and synthetic propositions, a priori propositions. Take care.